Nobody expected a quiet man from the Philippines, who once sang on street corners to help his family to stand on the world's biggest stage. But when Marcelito Pomoy walked onto AGT Champions, carrying decades of struggle in his smile, he wasn't just chasing a dream. He was honoring everyone who believed in him when the world didn't. Long before bright stages and golden buzzers, Marcelito Pomoy's world was small, quiet, and rough around the edges. He grew up in a humble Filipino town where concrete walls carried cracks like stories, and the houses leaned close together as if sharing the weight of everyone's worries. In that world, people didn't speak much about dreams. Dreams were fragile things, easily broken, and no one wanted to see a child hurt by them. Marcelito's childhood wasn't shaped by toys or field trips. It was shaped by survival. His parents separated early, and for reasons life never fully explained, both faded from his day-to-day existence. He became, in many ways, a child of the streets and a child of the community, fed not by abundance, but by the small kindnesses of neighbors who never had much but found ways to share what little they could. A bowl of rice here, a pair of shoes passed down, a smile when there wasn't much else to give. From a young age, Marcelito learned the silent lessons of hardship: how to keep going even when you're scared, how to accept help without shame, how to hold gratitude for the smallest gestures. But more than anything, he learned that loneliness could be loud, enough to echo through a young heart that didn't understand why families come apart. Music found him in that loneliness. It wasn't something he pursued, it was something that showed up, like a friend who knocks on your door even when you have nothing to offer in return. He discovered he could sing one afternoon while helping a neighbor wash dishes behind a small roadside eatery. A familiar song played on an old radio, and without thinking, young Marcelito sang along. The woman stopped scrubbing, looked at him, and smiled, with wet eyes, not out of sadness, but surprise. "That voice," she whispered, "is a gift. Don't ever hide it." It was the first time anyone had called anything about him a gift, and the words lodged themselves deep in his heart. After that, neighbors began asking him to sing during gatherings or to brighten their slow afternoons. Marcelito never asked for payment, but sometimes people would press coins into his hand, or slip leftover food into a small packet. Music didn't just give him comfort, it gave him dignity. It allowed him to contribute, to feel useful, to feel seen. As he grew older, he sang in markets, outside grocery stores, at bus terminals, anywhere people were gathered, anywhere an echo could carry. Sometimes he sang with a boyish smile, other times with eyes quietly weighed down by the things life had taken. But there was always warmth in his voice, a tenderness born from knowing what it feels like to lack and still hope. Every note he learned carried a piece of his journey, every melody, a memory. Hunger taught him control. Gratitude taught him humility. And the kindness of strangers taught him to sing, not just to be heard, but to connect. Life had taken much from Marcelito, but in return, it handed him something precious: a voice shaped by struggle, softened by compassion, and destined to touch hearts far beyond the streets where it began. Years passed, like chapters in a book no one expected to read. Marcelito's voice carried him through small competitions, radio appearances, and stages that felt impossibly big to the kid who once sang beside buses for coins. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared him for the gravity of America's Got Talent, the champions. Stepping into that building felt like stepping into another universe. The hallways were lined with posters of past contestants' acts who had become household names, stories the world had embraced. There were cameras everywhere, faces he recognized from TV, and an energy buzzing so loud it was almost tangible. Producers, assistants with headsets, contestants nervously humming, makeup artists rushing everywhere he looked. He saw motion and purpose as he waited backstage, hands clasped lightly. Marcelito wasn't thinking about winning. He wasn't thinking about fame. He was thinking about home, about the markets where he used to sing, the neighbors who pressed coins into his hand, the nights he practiced alone under dim lights, dreaming of stages he could barely imagine. And now, those dreams had faces, thousands of them seated in the arena beyond the curtain. A staff member gently tapped his shoulder. "You're up soon, she said, with a warm smile. His heart began to drum in his chest. He took a slow breath, the kind you take when you're not sure if you're waking up or stepping into a miracle. The curtains parted just enough for him to glimpse the audience. The stage lights poured out like sunrise across a dark ocean. Judges sat poised behind their table, Howie, Heidi, Alicia, and then Simon Cowell. Simon had a reputation that stretched farther than any stage, brutally honest. Fiercely intelligent, impossible to impress. His reactions could change careers, for better or worse. For a split second, Marcelito felt small again, like the kid in the market, asking strangers to listen. But then another memory rose of people who had believed in him long before any cameras turned his way. It steadied him. The announcer called his name. With a final breath, he walked onto that stage. The moment he appeared, the crowd murmured with curiosity. Many knew his story from the Philippines. Others had no idea who he was. But everyone sensed something, an unspoken humility, a quiet dignity in the way he held himself. Heidi leaned forward. "Welcome back, Marcelito," she said warmly. "What made you decide to return to compete against champions?" Marcelito swallowed softly. "Because I want to share my gift, and I want to give hope to people who come from nothing. If you believe anything is possible." His words weren't rehearsed. They were simple, honest, born from places most people never saw. The music began. A single spotlight fell over him, carving him out of the darkness. The first notes floated from his voice, gentle, controlled, mesmerizing. Then came the unmistakable shift, the sudden rise into a powerful second voice, operatic, soaring, defying logic and expectations. People stared with open mouths. Howie blinked hard. Heidi covered her lips. Alicia whispered, "Oh my God," but it was Simon's reaction that stole the moment. His eyebrows lifted just, a fraction, eyes locked, studying, stunned. There was something like wonder mixed with disbelief. As if he were witnessing something the world hadn't explained yet. Marcelito stood there. Not as a contestant desperate for approval, but as a man honoring every hardship that had led him to that stage. In that performance, he wasn't singing to impress, he was singing to connect. To tell people across oceans and borders, you matter, and your dreams matter. By the time the music swelled toward its final note, the arena wasn't just listening, they were feeling. And Marcelito, under those blinding lights, was no longer the boy from the corner of a market. He was an artist, standing in his destiny. The last note of Marcelito's performance didn't just end, it hung in the air, trembling with power. For a full heartbeat, the entire arena froze, as if no one dared to break the spell he'd woven. Then, like a dam bursting, the audience erupted. People shot to their feet, clapping, cheering, shouting words he couldn't fully process through the adrenaline roaring in his veins. From the balcony to the front row, strangers were wiping tears, clutching their hearts, shaking their heads in disbelief. Couples hugged, kids screamed, camera phones rose like fireflies capturing the magic. Even seasoned stagehands, the ones who've seen everything, looked stunned. But on the judges' panel, that's where the real miracle unfolded. Howie Mandel was the first to react. He slapped the desk with a grin, laughing in pure disbelief. "That's not possible," he shouted, pointing at Marcelito like he had just performed an illusion. Two voices, one man. How? Heidi Klum stood up next, hands over her mouth, her eyes shining. "You are a treasure," she declared. "A real treasure to this world." Alicia Dixon fanned her face, blinking back tears. "I don't even know how to react," she said, shaking her head. "Your voices, they're not just beautiful, they're haunting. It's spiritual. I'm honestly speechless." But the entire room seemed to lean toward one person, Simon Cowell. Simon sat still for a moment, elbows on the table. Eyes narrowed, not in skepticism, but in deep concentration. He had seen thousands of performances in his lifetime. Singers, dancers, illusionists, prodigies. Things that dazzled, things that bored, things that frustrated. Yet very few things made Simon Cowell look genuinely moved. Marcelito's performance was one of those rare things. Slowly, Simon leaned back in his chair and allowed a smile, almost hesitant, but warm and unmistakably real, to spread across his face. That, he finally said, pointing with emphasis, was unbelievable. The crowd roared again, delighted by his reaction, but Simon wasn't finished. In a competition full of champions, he continued, you managed to do something that's extremely difficult. You took a song that could have been predictable, and you made it unforgettable. That takes talent, control, and heart. Marcelito bowed, his hand over his heart, soaking in the moment. But inside, there was no smugness, no triumph, just a quiet disbelief and deep gratitude. He never imagined he would stand here receiving praise from one of the world's toughest critics. A man he once only saw through television screens now looked at him with respect. Backstage, crew members exchanged glances, whispering things like "That's going viral," and "Simon loved it, did you see that?" Cameras followed Marcelito as he walked off stage, shaking slightly from the adrenaline. Contestants waiting in the wings extended hands, offering congratulations, high fives, hugs. But the moment that stood out came when an older janitor, pushing a mop bucket, paused and smiled. That was beautiful. "Son," he said softly. Marcelito bowed his head, humbled. Compliments from celebrities were surreal, but compliments from ordinary people, people who worked hard and lived quietly, meant something different, something deeper. Because for Marcelito, the victory was never about fame, was about connection. And in those cheers, in Simon's rare praise, in the janitor's gentle words, he realized something powerful. Sometimes, the world doesn't need to understand how you do the impossible, it just needs to feel it. And tonight, they did. The roar of the audience slowly faded behind Marcelito as he stepped into the backstage hallway. Escorted by staff and cameras hungry to capture every second, bright lights still danced in his eyes, his heart still beat too quickly, and the adrenaline still buzzed through his veins like electricity. But as he moved farther from the stage, something quieter began to settle in: relief, gratitude, a sense of peace he rarely allowed himself to feel. Crew members clapped him on the shoulder. Producers leaned in to whisper praises. Other contestants congratulated him. But Marcelito didn't linger in the noise. He offered grateful smiles, gentle bows, soft thank yous, and kept walking. Fame had never been his destination. It was just a hallway he happened to pass through. As he turned a corner, he noticed a small crowd gathered near one of the large TV monitors that played the live show feed. His performance replayed with commentary. In front of the screen sat a boy in a wheelchair, legs covered by a blanket, his thin hands resting quietly on the armrests. His mother stood behind him with hopeful eyes, watching her son's face instead of the show. The boy's eyes glimmered like starlight as he watched Marcelito sing on screen. His lips moved silently, as though he were trying to mimic the words, or maybe just breathe them in. When the video ended, and the hallway broke into applause, he did not clap. He simply smiled. A small, pure smile that carried every emotion he couldn't physically express. Marcelito approached without cameras, without an entourage, without announcing himself. Just a man crossing a room because his heart told him to. "Hello," he said softly. The boy looked up, startled, as if an angel had stepped out of the monitor. The mother gasped and covered her mouth, tears forming instantly. "Oh my goodness, hi," she stammered. "He's your biggest fan. We've watched your performances so many times." Marcelito knelt down beside the wheelchair so his eyes met the boy's. "Thank you for watching," he said gently. "You give me strength too." The boy's voice was faint, but determined. "You're amazing," he whispered. Marcelito reached for the bouquet of flowers he had been handed on stage. Vibrant and fresh, still tied with a ribbon bearing the show's logo. He held them out. "These are for you," he said. The mother began to cry, not loudly, not dramatically, just silently, the way someone cries when they've carried too much for too long. Through trembling breaths, she told Marcelito how her son had endured surgeries, how music helped distract him from pain, how watching it gave him something to look forward to, something bright in days that were often dim. Marcelito swallowed hard. He touched the boy's hand gently. "Would you like me to sing something for you?" The boy's eyes widened. He nodded, so Marcelito sang quietly, without microphones or spotlights. Just his raw voice in a hallway filled with tired staff and half-drunk coffee cups. The song floated through the air like a blessing. Other contestants and crew stopped talking, cameras lowered. Nobody dared interrupt. When he finished, the boy exhaled shakily, as if the music itself had reached somewhere the doctors couldn't. "Thank you," he whispered. Marcelito smiled. "No, thank you." There were no judges there. No audience votes. No critics. Just a boy, a mother, and a man who understood how much kindness can matter when the world offers so little of it. And for Marcelito, that moment and scene, unbroadcasted, uncelebrated, meant more than any standing ovation ever could. The final results of the AGT Champions season came and went in a blur of lights, confetti, and tightened smiles. One by one, names were called, trophies were lifted, and cameras swung to capture every gleam and tear. Marcelito stood alongside the other finalists, calm and steady. No desperation in his eyes, only gratitude. When his name wasn't called as the winner, the audience gasped in surprise. Some booed softly, out of disappointment. Others shook their heads as if the universe had miscalculated. But Marcelito didn't flinch. He smiled, bowed, and applauded the winner with genuine warmth. Because he knew something many people spend their whole lives trying to understand. Being celebrated is wonderful. But being impactful is rare. And impact doesn't need a trophy. After the show wrapped, interviews swarmed him. Reporters asked if he was disappointed. Fans online debated the results, writing paragraphs defending him, praising him, demanding justice, sharing how his voice had moved them. But when the cameras turned off, Marcelito sat quietly in a backstage folding chair, feeling the soft ache of exhaustion settle into his shoulders. He looked at his hands empty of trophies and felt no loss. How could he feel loss when he had gained so much? In the following weeks, something incredible happened. Clips of his performances spread across social media like wildfire. Millions of views turned into tens of millions. Comments flooded in from every corner of the world. "I watched this during my chemo. His voice helped me get through the day. My son is autistic and he won't speak, but he sings along to Marcelito. This made me cry in the best way. Thank you for reminding me to keep going. I was having a dark day. His music gave me light." Marcelito didn't just go viral, he became a vessel of healing for people who needed something pure and hopeful to hold on to. Night after night, he read these messages not as a celebrity basking in praise, but as a humble man who understood suffering. He wrote back as often as he could, reminding strangers that they mattered. "Thank you for sharing your story. You are stronger than you know. Don't give up. I'm cheering for you. Dreams don't expire." In a world that often felt divided, chaotic, and loud, his kindness threaded people together in quiet ways. His voice crossed borders, languages, religions, and political lines, because music doesn't need permission to enter the heart. It just needs honesty. Months later, during a small charity concert, he closed his eyes while singing and felt something shift. Not in the room, but inside himself. He realized that the most meaningful part of his journey was never the competition. It was the connections, the stories, the souls he had unknowingly lifted. When the final note faded, he addressed the crowd. "We don't always get the trophy," he said, smiling softly, "but sometimes we get something better. We get to give. We get to help someone believe again. And that is enough." People rose to their feet, not because he won, but because he gave. Because, in the end, the greatest champions aren't the ones who take home the prize. They're the ones who leave pieces of their heart behind, so others can find theirs.